Ever rolled your eyes at one of those diversity initiatives at work and thought, like, come on, does this stuff really make a difference? Well, get ready to maybe change your mind a bit, because in this deep dive, we're going to be looking at a study on gender integration in, of all places, the Norwegian military.
Yeah, so we're not talking about just like theories here. We're looking at the real life effects of what happens when you bring women into, one of the most traditionally male-dominated environments.
Yeah, exactly. And this isn't just any study. This research had a really wild setup, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. The researchers actually randomly assigned women to squads during the basic training, the 8-week boot camp.
Whoa.
Just imagine that. It's basically a real world experiment.
Yeah, they basically created all these little mini societies with different levels of gender integration, and then could see how these different environments impacted people's attitudes.
Yeah, exactly. You got it.
Okay.
And that random assignment thing is super important because it means the researchers can be way more confident that any changes they saw in attitudes were actually caused by being exposed to women and not some other random thing.
That makes total sense.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Are you ready to dive in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Data on the screen, numbers come alive. Male, female flows where the patterns thrive. Visual charts, public colors unify. Gender decoded, bringing truth to light. Watch them all drum fill. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling, facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide.
Can integrating women into male-dominated teams change men's attitudes?
Right. And we're not just talking about, surface level stuff here, but core beliefs about gender roles, productivity, even how men see themselves.
Exactly. And it's not some, stuffy lab experiment or anything like that.
Right.
This research took place in the Norwegian military.
Wow.
Where they actually introduced mandatory female conscription back in 2015.
Really?
Yeah. So researchers saw this as a perfect opportunity, a large-scale change that they could study, and they designed a field experiment right in the middle of this intense 8-week boot camp.
Oh, wow. It's like trial by fire, right?
Yeah, exactly. So what were they looking at specifically? I mean, were they just measuring if the guys were, happy to have women around, or?
No, it was way more nuanced than that.
Okay.
They were really focused on 3 very specific attitudes. So first, did the men think that mixed gender teams were as productive or even better than all male teams?
Okay.
Second, what were their views on gender roles at home?
Yeah.
Who should be responsible for chores and things like that.
Okay.
And the third one, this was really interesting. It was kind of more internal.
Okay.
How did these men perceive femininity as a characteristic? Did they see it as negative, something to avoid?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so some serious measures in place here. So let's talk about those baseline attitudes before the experiment began.
Sure.
One of the charts that we have really jumped out at me. It showed that nearly half the men believed that single-gender teams worked better.
Right.
I mean, that's a pretty strong bias going into this whole thing.
It is. And it really reflects those persistent societal stereotypes that we see, especially in environments that are known for hypermasculinity.
Right.
So these young recruits are coming in. They've already spent years absorbing this idea that leadership, competence, all those things are somehow tied to being male.
Yeah, you almost wonder if those traditional attitudes might even be more resistant to change in a setting like boot camp, right?
You would think so.
So what happened after those 8 weeks of intense training?
Well, the results were really remarkable in just that short period of time. There was a 14% increase in men who now believe that mixed gender teams were as good or even better.
Wow.
And to put that in perspective, that wiped out 40% of that pre-existing bias.
Now, that's what I call a breakthrough.
Yeah.
So what do you think, what factors led to such a significant shift in such a short amount of time?
Well, I think the specific design of this study really played a crucial role here.
Okay.
It wasn't just about having women present. These recruits were thrown into an incredibly cooperative environment. They had to rely on each other to succeed regardless of gender.
Yeah.
And seeing women excel in these traditionally masculine tasks, day after day, that had to have challenged some of those assumptions.
That makes sense. You can't really cling to those stereotypes when you're seeing them proven wrong right in front of you.
Exactly.
So what about those other beliefs, the ones about chores and femininity?
Right.
Did those shift at all?
They did, and in some cases, pretty dramatically, there was an 8% increase in men who now supported an equal division of household labor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that means the gap between how men and women viewed that responsibility was almost cut in half.
That's amazing.
It really suggests that this close interaction, where you see someone as an equal partner, can start to break down those rigid gender roles.
So far, everything seems so positive, but wasn't there a concern, going into this that adding women to this intense environment could negatively impact the men's experience?
Oh, for sure. That was a huge question that researchers considered.
Yeah.
And thankfully, their findings were pretty reassuring. There was no evidence to suggest that integration negatively impacted the men's experience or their commitment to serving in the military.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah, definitely.
But going back to those initial attitudes, Norway is considered a pretty progressive country overall, right?
It is, yeah.
So why were these recruits starting off with such strong biases?
That's a good question, and I think it's important to remember that even though Norway has this strong egalitarian culture, overall, these recruits were often coming from smaller towns and communities where traditional gender roles might be more deeply entrenched.
Ah, yeah.
It's a reminder that even in societies that are really pushing for equality, those deep-seated beliefs can linger,
That raises an interesting question. Did the researchers look into whether exposure to female leaders could have an even greater impact on those attitudes about women in authority?
That's a fantastic point and definitely an area for further study. I think the boot camp setting didn't really provide many opportunities to observe female leadership in action.
Right.
But it definitely highlights the fact that, there's always more to explore in this field.
It feels like these findings have implications far beyond just the military, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, imagine applying these insights to workplaces, education, even our personal lives.
Exactly, and that's actually what we're going to dive into next. We're going to explore some real-world examples of how organizations and individuals are taking these insights and putting them into practice.
Okay, I'm ready for some inspiration.
Get ready for some inspiring stories.
Okay, wow. That study really got me thinking. If something as intense as boot camp can shift these really deep-seated attitudes. I mean, imagine the possibilities in other areas of life.
Yeah, that's what's so exciting about this research.
Yeah.
It suggests that change is possible even in areas that we often think of as resistant to change.
Yeah.
And we're already seeing examples, of people and organizations actually putting these insights into action.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me some real-world inspiration.
All right, let's start with an industry that's been grappling with gender diversity for a long time, the tech sector.
Yeah.
Yeah, for years it's had this reputation, right, as being a bit of a boys' club with all the unfortunate stereotypes that come with that.
Yeah, you hear stories about that bro culture, and it doesn't exactly sound like the most welcoming environment for women.
Right.
Are things actually changing? Are companies taking this seriously?
Some are, and they're finding that diversity isn't just about, doing the right thing. It's good for business.
Okay.
One company that's really caught my eye is Atlassian.
Okay.
They're known for their collaborative software tools, but they're also walking the walk when it comes to building diverse teams.
That's interesting. What are they doing differently? I mean, is it just about hiring more women, or is there more to it?
It's definitely a multi-pronged approach. They've implemented things like unconscious bias training for hiring managers,
Okay.
which helps to identify and address those hidden biases that can creep into the hiring process.
Yeah.
They also have these mentorship programs, specifically for women in tech, which provide support and guidance for career advancement.
So they're not just bringing women in, they're giving them the tools and support to actually thrive.
Exactly.
But what about the bigger picture? Are they actually changing the overall culture of the company?
That's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
They've created this dedicated diversity and belonging team,
Huh.
and they're tasked with fostering a truly inclusive environment for everyone. It's about creating a workplace where people feel valued and respected regardless of their gender background or anything else that makes them unique.
It sounds like they're really trying to embed diversity and inclusion into the DNA of their company.
They are.
Have they seen any tangible results from these efforts?
Absolutely. They've seen a significant increase in the number of women in leadership positions, and employee surveys show that people feel a much stronger sense of belonging.
That's great.
It's proof that when companies are really intentional about creating an inclusive culture, it can lead to real change.
Okay, tech is one thing, but let's be honest, it's always been a bit more progressive than other industries. What about a field that's known for being, well, let's just say traditionally masculine? Are there any bright spots there?
There are. Let's shift gears and talk about the construction industry.
Okay.
Hard hats, heavy machinery. A job site doesn't exactly scream gender equality.
No, not really.
But even here, there are companies actively working to change the narrative.
I'm picturing those old recruitment posters with those like burly men flexing their muscles, not exactly inviting for women.
Right.
What would a company even do to try and change that image?
It takes a combination of concrete actions and a real commitment to shifting the culture. One company that's making waves is Mace,
Okay.
a UK-based construction firm. They've publicly committed to increasing the number of women in their workforce, and not just in office roles, but on construction sites, managing projects, operating those big machines.
Wow, that's a bold move.
Yeah.
How are they actually making that happen? How do you overcome those deeply ingrained stereotypes that associate construction with men?
It's multifaceted. They've got apprenticeship programs specifically designed for women, giving them a direct pathway into the industry.
Okay.
They're also partnering with schools to encourage girls to consider careers in construction, trying to broaden those aspirations early on.
So they're really tackling this issue from multiple angles,
They are.
which is probably key. Are they seeing any pushback from the existing workforce?
There will always be some resistance to change.
Right.
But Mace is very proactive about addressing it. They have zero tolerance for harassment or discrimination, and they're really fostering this culture of respect and collaboration on their sites. They're demonstrating that a diverse workforce could be a stronger workforce.
It seems like this theme of changing the culture is emerging across all these different examples. It's not enough to just hire more women. You have to create an environment where everyone feels like they belong.
You hit the nail on the head. It's about fostering that sense of belonging and creating a workplace where everyone can thrive and reach their full potential, regardless of gender.
Okay, so we've got the private sector making strides, but what about governments? Are there any examples of public policy initiatives that are pushing for change in this area?
There are some really innovative approaches emerging. Iceland, for example, has taken a bold step. They've made it a legal requirement for companies with more than 25 employees to obtain equal pay certification.
Wait, they actually passed a law.
They did.
That's amazing. How does that even work?
It's a pretty rigorous process. Companies have to undergo an audit to demonstrate that they're paying men and women equally for equal work, and it goes beyond just base salary. It includes things like bonuses and benefits.
Wow.
It's about ensuring that there are no hidden discrepancies in compensation.
That's a serious commitment to closing the gender pay gap. Have they faced any challenges in implementing this law?
There's been some pushback, from businesses who see it as an additional burden, but the Icelandic government has provided resources and support to help companies navigate the process, and ultimately it sends this powerful message that equal pay is not just a nice idea, it's a fundamental right.
I love that they're taking such a proactive approach. It sounds like Iceland is really trying to lead by example.
They are, and it's having a ripple effect. Other countries are looking at their model and considering similar legislation. It's a reminder that governments can play a crucial role in driving progress on gender equality.
So we've gone from a military boot camp to tech companies to construction sites to government policy. It's inspiring to see so many different sectors embracing this idea that diversity isn't just a box to tick, but a real opportunity for positive change. But what does all of this mean for our listeners? Where do we go from here?
That's a great question, and it's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll talk about practical steps that anyone can take, regardless of their background or profession, to challenge gender stereotypes and be an advocate for change.
Okay, sounds good. I'm ready to turn inspiration into action. All right, so we've seen how integrating women into these male-dominated spaces can lead to some pretty incredible shifts in attitudes, and we've heard some inspiring examples of companies and even entire countries taking action. But what can we as individuals do to be part of this change? It feels a little daunting to go from boot camps and national policies to our everyday lives.
Yeah, I think that's a really common feeling. But the truth is, even small actions can have a ripple effect. And I think it starts with self-awareness.
Right.
We all carry biases, often unconsciously. So before we try to change the world, it's helpful to examine our own beliefs and behaviors.
Okay, that's easier said than done, though, right? Sometimes I don't even realize I'm holding on to a stereotype until someone points it out. Any tips for uncovering those hidden biases?
Yeah, I think paying attention to your language is a great place to start.
Okay.
Think about the phrases you use casually. You say things like man up or throw like a girl. Even if they seem harmless, Those expressions reinforce the idea that certain traits are inherently masculine or feminine.
Yeah, you're right. I've definitely caught myself using those phrases without even thinking about it. What else should we be looking out for?
I think it's also helpful to notice your reactions to people who defy gender stereotypes.
Yeah.
You know, do you get uncomfortable or surprised when a woman is assertive in a meeting or when a man expresses vulnerability? Those reactions can be clues to your own unconscious biases.
That's a really helpful way to frame it. It's not about beating ourselves up for having biases. It's about being aware of them so we can start to challenge them. So once we've done some of that inner work, what's next?
Well, then it's time to start speaking up.
Yeah.
If you hear a sexist joke or a comment, don't just let it slide.
Yeah.
Silence often gets interpreted as agreement. Now, you don't have to get into a huge argument every time, but a simple, that's not funny, or I don't think that's appropriate, can go a long way.
I'll admit, sometimes I hesitate to speak up because I don't want to come off as like preachy or confrontational. Is there a way to address those situations without, making things awkward?
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes a gentle redirect can be really effective. Instead of directly criticizing someone, try asking a question like, why do you think that's okay? It shifts the focus and encourages them to think about the impact of their words.
I like that approach. It's less about putting someone on the spot and more about encouraging reflection. So we're examining our own biases, we're speaking up against sexism. What else can we do to move the needle on this issue?
Be a role model. Actions often speak louder than words. Challenge gender stereotypes in your own life if you're a woman. Don't shy away from leadership opportunities if you're a man. Share those household responsibilities and show your emotions.
It's about putting those egalitarian values into practice in our own lives. And not just for ourselves, but for the next generation too, right?
Exactly. Kids are incredibly perceptive. Talk to them about gender equality, expose them to diverse role models, encourage them to question those rigid stereotypes they might encounter in the world. If we can plant those seeds of equality early on, it can make a huge difference in the long run.
It makes me think about all those subtle messages kids pick up from movies, toys, even the adults around them. We have a real opportunity to shape their understanding of what's possible.
We do. And one final thought. There are so many amazing organizations out there working tirelessly to advance gender equality. Consider supporting them. Whether you donate your time, money, or skills, your contributions can help amplify their impact.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the enormity of this issue, but it sounds like there are concrete steps we can all take to be a part of the solution.
That's the key takeaway. Change doesn't happen overnight. It takes ongoing effort and commitment from all of us. But every conversation, every action, every time we challenge a stereotype, we're contributing to a more just and equitable world.
This has been an incredible deep dive. We've explored the science behind gender attitudes, seen inspiring examples of change and action, and armed ourselves with practical tools to be advocates for equality in our own lives.
And remember, this isn't just about women. Gender stereotypes harm everyone. When we break down those barriers, we create a world where everyone can thrive and reach their full potential.
So to our listeners, what will you do today to challenge gender stereotypes and be an advocate for change? We'd love to hear your stories. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better world.